Hello. Now, if this story had come, in The Guardian no less, it had come from a Conservative government, The Guardian would be shrieking about the horrors of forcing people to take medication they don't want to take. Oops. Where have I heard that before? Well, I have YouTube to consider, and so I shall forego a discussion about other medications and concentrate on this particular story. Keir Starmer and his government think they're throwing a sop to the proles as if a threat of chemical castration will solve the Rochdale effect. I'm pretty sure that most of you already have an idea that it won't, and for a particular reason. And I'm going to articulate that for you. I'm Granniopteryx. Please click like for this video. Please subscribe to my channel. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you still are. Oh, and share. Also, if you feel like buying me a coffee or tipping me on PayPal, I'd be very happy with that, seeing as, however careful I am, it's sort of likely that YouTube are going to demonetize this one. But it's a subject I have studied in some detail, and I really feel that I have something to say about it. Also, I spent this morning mopping water off the kitchen floor and going through the freezer in the garage to find stuff I could throw away because the fridge freezer in the kitchen broke down. And there was so much stuff in there. All right, let's get on with bigger issues. So the story is Shabana Mahmood considers chemical castration for serious sex offenders. The Lord Chancellor is considering mandatory chemical castration for the most serious sex offenders, according to government sources. The Minister's Department is planning to expand a pilot to 20 regions as part of a package of radical measures to free thousands of prisoners and ease prison overcrowding in England and Wales. So, Starmer's government has a problem. They're running out of prison spaces. In fact, I think they've already run out of prison spaces. Now, most people would suggest to the government that perhaps they could make more room by releasing people who've been banged up for years for saying naughty things the government doesn't like. Like Sam Mellier, for instance, who committed the terrible crime of putting stickers on lampposts saying, "It's all right to be white," or something like that. Apparently, he also had a book at home written by Oswald Mosley, the British fascist of the 1930s. You may remember recently that someone else was arrested, a retired policeman called Julian Fuchs, whose house was raided, and during the search, one of the officers triumphantly pulled a book off the shelf, which she declared to be very Brexity. No, I probably have my differences of opinion with Mr. Mellier, but from what I've seen of his output, it's a lot milder than anything you'd hear in any local place of worship on a Friday afternoon. In reverse, of course. And then there's Lucy Connolly, in jail for nearly 3 years for a single tweet. And of course there's Tommy Robinson, who is now being prosecuted for not giving the police the PIN of his phone. Now, if the government released, or even more radically, never arrested those guys in the first place, I'll bet you'd have bags of room in the prisons. But the sort of people who join and run the Labour Party, well, they don't think like that, do they? Crimes are one thing, but speech, now, that's something else entirely. So instead of thinking of releasing the speakers, Keir Starmer is talking about chemical castration for offenders of a certain type. I do hope you'll forgive the circumlocution here. I'm going to be doing quite a bit of it. I do hope you'll understand. YouTube, yeah. When I heard about Starmer's latest wheeze to show, how tough and decisive his government is, I was brought to mind of this procedure, which I know goes on in another country. Chemical castration is used in Israel for offenders. But there is a huge difference. While the proposal here is to make it mandatory, in Israel, it has to be asked for. It can't be given without consent. And in those cases, it's really quite successful. You see, the problem with sex offenders is they have an astonishing capacity for rationalising their actions. I'm talking here about men, mostly. So I'm sorry, there are, others, but the big problem is men, I'm afraid. And I'm talking about men who have a problem controlling themselves around, men who have a predilection for smaller people of a younger age. You might notice that in certain court cases in the north of England, the men in the dock insisted that they'd done nothing wrong. Now, if you haven't actually come across people of that particular inclination in therapy groups and such like, you'd be astonished at the way they justify what they got caught for. It often revolves around either the victim was to blame for being provocative, which is the argument that was used in many of the recent court cases, or the perp explains that he was teaching the smaller person about life or developing a closer relationship or something. And there's nothing wrong with it because it either comes from the victim's own sinfulness, being allowed out after 5 o'clock in the evening or wearing a short skirt, that sort of thing. Or it comes from pure feelings of education and comradeship. It's you hear these stories in group therapy all the time. So it's sort of interesting because although the sinner, I'm using the word sinner now, so I'm not using the same word too often. Although the sinner cannot himself see what he's done wrong, all the others in the group can identify it straight away. However, when another member of the group has to speak, even though he identified it in the other speaker, he can't identify it in himself, although everyone else in the group, including the other speaker, can see that. I hope this is relatively clear. I'm so sorry if I'm dealing with it in such a roundabout way that it's becoming opaque. This is not by my choice, you understand. Anyway, for that reason, this sort of problem is astonishingly difficult to root out. However, when you get a subject who requests the chemical solution, that's because he's acknowledged to himself that he has a problem. It's not the rest of the world that's wrong. He knows it's him. And because he's acknowledging it, that means he's halfway to a cure. And it means he'll be making that sacrifice. And by that, I mean he'll be taking medication which has some pretty serious side effects. None of these medicines are magic bullets, The two most common ones, in Israel at any rate, when applied to mature men, they have the effect of reducing testosterone levels. So, less testosterone, less sex drive. But concomitant with that, a tendency to develop a somewhat larger chest, and worse, also a tendency to that female problem of osteoporosis, thinning bones. Well, the upside is you're less likely to go bald if you aren't already. Okay, so If an offender wants to go on this course of treatment, he's most definitely proving that he really wants to sort the problem and live what he sees as a normal life. But that's the point. He acknowledges that he has something wrong with his wiring and he wants to fix it, even at a price. So, as I say, these such patients are treated very successfully. And they're quite safe in society so long as they keep up the medication. However, if this treatment is forced on a criminal who doesn't acknowledge that what he's been doing is wrong, the success rate plummets, of course. You see, because a substantial proportion of such offenders are not so much in it for the physical gratification, they're in it for the exercise of power. And if these medications stop them from acting badly with the usual piece of equipment, it's rather possible that they'll try using something else. So that's not an answer. You might reduce the prison population by a few, but some of the released men will be very dangerous indeed. However, not as dangerous as people saying silly things on X or Facebook. We have to keep a sense of proportion here, haven't we? Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.